everybody. Assemblyman Chad Lupinacci. Chad is Huntington's own, graduated from Walt Whitman High School. Among his many attributes and accomplishments, Chad has been working hard on creating new jobs locally, school financing reform, and keeping Huntington safe of criminal elements in the town. Okay, so let's hear from the person directly. Chad Lupinacci, welcome.
Very good to see you. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
And thank you very much for taking care of our community. I know you've done a lot of work with this community so far. Just to kind of round things up, what drove you to be a politician to begin with?
Well, I spent, I went to Walt Whitman High School, like you said, in South Huntington. And when I graduated from that, I went on to Hofstra University, where I studied political science. And while I was a student in political science at Hofstra, I had 2 internships that really turned me on to government. So it's great to have the in the classroom experience, but I always tell my students, because I still teach today, that you always need to get the out of school experience too. So I intern. I did 1 internship up in Albany, where I was a full-time intern for my predecessor, Assemblyman Jim Conti, and I received 15 credits for it, and I did it during the spring semester. And there I really got to learn a lot about the process. Got to see how bills were created, did research, got to meet with constituents, got to meet with community officials, got to see how the legislative process worked from firsthand. Then after I finished that internship, I did a second internship, and that was down in Washington, D.C. I was a 15-credit, 1-semester intern for Hillary Clinton when she was First Lady. So I had the legislative experience when I was up in Albany, and then I had the executive experience in terms of interning at the White House afterwards. So after I graduated from Hofstra for undergrad, I decided to go right into law school. So I studied law at Hofstra University. When I was exiting law school, I decided to run for the school board in South Huntington. So I was first elected to the school board in 2004, re-elected in 2007, and then re-elected in 2010. And in 2012, Assemblyman Conti, who had been in office for 25 years.
I missed him, yeah.
He was a double, and we'll speak a little bit about him in terms of organ donation a little bit later.
Okay.
But he was, a double kidney transplant when he was younger, about between the ages of 29 and 30.
Oh.
And then, unfortunately, when he was 53, he was suffering from brain cancer. So he decided in that July of 2012 not to run again. So he declined the nomination. And he asked me, and other Republicans asked me to step up and see if I wanted to run for the Assembly. So at that point, I was teaching full-time at Farmingdale College, where I taught business law, and also was practicing law and was on the school board. So I was like enjoying my life because I was, being very productive and doing a lot in terms of the community, whether I was at the school board or whether I was in the classroom. So that night, I only had about 24 hours to think about whether or not I was going to accept the nomination, because it was a very strange piece of law that if someone declines in the middle of July, you only have like about 24 to 48 hours to fill it. It's called the Committee on Vacancies goes into effect. So I was kind of up in the air of whether or not I wanted to run. So I go into a night class that I was teaching. It was a Business Law 2 class at Farmingdale College, and asked the students what I should do. And it was 16 students in the class, and unanimously said, go for it, because you might regret it down the line. So then I never looked back and won election in 2012 and was re-elected in 2014.
And obviously very happy that you did all that.
Yeah, so it worked out very well.
Made that decision,
So, yeah, because whenever you make those lifestyle changes, usually you can't make them in 48 hours. So
yeah, it's such a tight time frame.
Yeah.
Are you surprised about the amount of work? Obviously, you have put a lot of pre-work in there, the colleges, the universities, the teaching, and all the things you've done in the federal government in Washington and up in Albany, but about how much work you need to put into this? I mean, at night and the days, and it just keeps going on, doesn't it?
Well, at the school board, I was on there for 9 years, so that was kind of a very good area, because we always had nighttime events and daytime events, because a lot of activity within the school district, not just school board meetings, but also going to concerts and going to meet with the PTA. So you knew that it's a big time commitment, because it's not just when you're up in Albany passing laws or when you're in your office. Like, for example, tonight, after we tape the show, I'm going to be going on to 4 other events. So, it's a 7-day-a-week job and all hours of the day. And when people, they get disappointed if you're not there. So we always try to carve out the time, whether it's meeting with constituents or whether it's going to community events. Like today, we had an Earth Day celebration at the community gardens off of New York Avenue. And people expect you to be there, because not only do they want to see you up in Albany passing good legislation, but also at the same point, they want to know that you're accessible and that people feel comfortable speaking to you about all different issues.
They want a hands-on feeling that you're in the community, right?
Exactly.
Doing community things. What kind of cooperation do you need to get from people to help you in the constituency? I know it may seem like an odd question, but like, for instance, I could use your help, for instance, from my Family Resource Center, hopefully in putting a mediation program together, right?
Right.
So in that regard, I have to come to you to see if you can support me in whatever way that you can.
Right.
Were you ready for all the types of needs that the community has?
Yeah, I mean, definitely people reach out to you, and there's a lot of things that we can help with because we are state officials, and there's other things that we can help people with because either it's a town or county issue. But we work very well with our other government officials at the town, the village, the county, school district level, so we always make sure people are pointed in the right direction to get the information that they need and to get the help that they need. But we always say, if you're having a problem, come see us. We could always point you in the right direction. Make an appointment with my staff. If there's a community event, say for instance, there's a civic association meeting, they're having a problem, have us come in and we'll speak, to the group. So we expect on our constituents to keep in touch with us, to email us, to call us if they're having problems, and especially if they know there's something on the horizon, because it's a lot easier to fix prior to damage being done than looking back and trying to fix it afterward. So we always want community input. We always like input on legislation, whether or not you think laws are popular, whether or not you think something would be a good idea to become a law, and we always need the feedback because our role, we're a democracy. I represent 130,000 people. I need input from those people so I know that I'm doing the best job is when I get the input from the people that I represent.
Sure, and you have a great staff, and obviously you need your staff to be in tune with the community as well.
Exactly, right. So we have staff, down here in Huntington where the district office is, because I represent most of the township of Huntington and parts of the town of Babylon, like in the East Farmingdale area.
The northern section, right?
What?
Northern section, north.
You're right. So in other words, the East Farmingdale area, it's the eastern part of Babylon. So the district actually begins in the southerly area where the two movie theaters are on 110 up in the Farmingdale area, wraps around East Farmingdale, so I have the East Farmingdale Fire District.
Water District?
Yes, and the parts of the Water District. And then it goes, it develops over the college, so I have Farmingdale State College, which is a great asset, and then it goes north right into Melville, South Huntington, Huntington Station, Elwood, Green Lawn, Huntington Village, and then into Lloyd Harbor, Cold Spring Harbor,
Northport.
And it cuts out right around Centerport and Northport because Assemblyman Rhea picks up those areas of Huntington.
Right, okay. What are the constituents asking for the most part? I know several of the politicians I've spoken to in the last couple of months tell me that the dominant amount of complaints are about family law. Mm-hmm. They can't get custody, they were removed from their access from their children, things that are like that. Mm-hmm. That's fairly more popular than I thought as a request.
So, we have it all different ways, especially because we're in the middle of April right now, correct? And so tax day, so there was a lot of people having trouble with their state income taxes in terms of, getting the information or getting the refunds. So we've had things on that. In terms of education, we've been helping, people with information on the Common Core exams and reforming the Common Core. And higher education, people are coming to us and saying, well, if we can't afford to send my child to college, are there resources out there in terms of scholarships or in terms of tuition assistance programs? And then also sometimes we will not be familiar with the law, but there's a law out there that's being proposed that maybe another colleague has, and they'll come and say, this should actually be made a law. Will you help support it or become a sponsor of it? So we get a lot of constituents coming in to speak to us about different legislation too.
Let's talk about the education for a minute. Mm-hmm. What are you supporting? I know the Common Core was pretty much most of the people I've talked to lately are against it. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the general monopoly of the number of people complaining about it.
Right.
So apparently this is a sore thumb for a lot of people.
Right.
Are you having a difficult time with it in the schools? Or?
Yeah, I mean, what it is that the Common Core, I think there's two usual complaints about it. Number one was the implementation was terrible. And the second thing was it created standards that were tied to the federal government. I think we all realize that we have some of the best schools on Long Island and in New York State, and across the country right here. And what the problem was with the Common Core was the rollout. People weren't prepped for it. The exams weren't drafted correctly. The curriculum was, implemented too fast. And what they really should have done with the Common Core, or whatever type of standards, is you should begin it in kindergarten and then roll out grade by grade.
Right.
Not switch it over.
I'm a former teacher. I get what you're talking
about. So, when you look at it, most of the math curriculum at the high school level is usually phased in. When they change it, when it's been sequential 1 to math A or B to what they call now, algebra, geometry, and trigonometry, those are all phased in over a period of time.
Together?
What?
No, that's the same course.
No, those are 3-year phase-ins, right? But those were phased in over time. They usually phase out one program, phase in the other, correct? What happened here was it wasn't phased in correctly and people didn't have the proper training. That was number one. Number two, there wasn't not enough resources. And I have a bill out there that would make all Common Core exams public documents after they're given, so you can go back and practice the exams and see what's on the exams. From, did you teach high school or?
High school, secondary ed, yeah.
Right, so you know that when Regents exams were given, they became public documents after they're given. They're up on the state website, so you can go back and take the last few exams in geometry for the past few years, correct? You can go back and practice those exams so you know what's on them. The problem is there wasn't enough resources in terms of sample questions, in terms of what to expect on these exams.
I've seen some of the math, and I know a lot about math, and I really had a tough time understanding how they can teach. I think that was secondary ed math, but it's still very difficult.
Right.
Very difficult.
Well, the emphasis now has been, cross-integration between the different curriculums in terms of making sure that people could, read a problem and get out of it. But still, we need to make sure that we teach people the basics. So if they can master the basics, then you can bring them on to higher comprehension. But if we're not teaching the basics well, like terms of the elementary algebra and such, there's no way you could throw the algebra into a word problem unless they know how to grasp the early elements of the algebra first.
Like you said, the rollout was difficult, and it does make sense for you to start early. But I had trouble figuring out how they would even start that early. How far back do you go? And they didn't put anything in place for the elementary kids?
Well, there wasn't. It was all phased out within a year or two. So all grades were going to be encompassed in the Common Core rather than being phased in year after year.
So are we out of it, or are we in it, or what are we doing?
Well, still right now, there has been a reduction on testing and reducing the number of tests and reducing the hours of the exams, correct? But still it has to be further looked. And what you're going to see here is that the Board of Regents has had some changes. The emphasis, and I serve as the ranker on the Higher Education Committee. So normally when we interview members of the Regents, and the Regents are the people that are appointed by the legislature to run the state education department. So they're basically the policy makers, for the education department. So what has happened over the past few years is that as people have retired and moved on, we've been trying to get more people with in the field experience, making sure that we have actual teachers or administrators or superintendents on the Board of Regents, and they actually have the real world experience so they can make the education policy the best. I can tell you, when I was first elected, I sit on the interview committee to interview the Board of Regents. And anyone can apply for the Board of Regents. They get an interview with the members of the interview committee. And the interview committee are members of the Higher Education Committee, both the Senate and the Assembly. Now, when I was first elected, there were about 4 or 5 members interviewing the members of the Board of Regents. The second year I was in office, there were 70 members interviewing members, because people all of a sudden realized what the Common Core was. They realized there was this pushback against the Common Core.
Yeah.
So now more of my colleagues were being more involved in the process of picking the Board of Regents members, which was a good thing, because now they were being interviewed, people were looking at more of their qualifications. And I think today, with the retirement of the past chancellor, we have a new chancellor coming in, I think you'll see a lot of positive changes going forward by what the Board of Regents does. Because we want to emphasize local control, and we want to emphasize not federal control, but state control in terms of what the actual curriculum should be and how it should be implemented.
Yeah, but don't you think, wasn't it always state controlled? Have the federal government get involved?
It was. But you've seen this push since the 1960s. Slowly, the federal government, got more involved in education. When Title I funding was created by the federal government, and that's very important because it makes sure that the school districts that have higher poverty rates and have high illiteracy rates, that they make sure that they get the funding they need. Now, the Department of Education was eventually created in the late 1970s by Jimmy Carter. So over the past few decades, you've seen more federal intervention in the states and kind of eroding of the states' rights to control education.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that the federal government, whether it was No Child Left Behind or other types of legislation, they've tied a lot of money, and that's basically how they do it. Even though they don't really have the right to be in education, the federal government, they could do it through money and strings attached money, saying if you don't give these exams, we're going to cut funding. So that's been the emphasis now, to take a lot of control away from the federal government and return it to the states in terms of local control. We're all for higher standards.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure that they're properly implemented,
That
we get, that the students get the training and get the academic backgrounds they need to succeed once they leave
For
school.
the longest time, we've been very low in the totem pole in terms of science and math.
Right.
Internationally.
Right.
And I don't know how that happened. I do remember the outcome-based education back in the late 60s. And that basically was a process of allowing people to progress at their own rate.
Right.
Which, to me, didn't work out so well.
Right. So
And
they
I
went
think
to
that's
non-graded
we had that
and things like
mindset.
that. Right.
That mindset.
And now you see a lot of the trigger words like STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we want to make sure that people get the emphasis that they need in the lower grades, because obviously we want them to go on into these interesting fields where they could be very successful.
Now back to higher education. Colleges are extremely expensive, and a lot of people can't afford them anymore.
Right.
The income rates for all of us, pretty much for all of us, hasn't increased with time.
Right.
Yet the education system seems to be calling for more dollars to put into it to get our kids to go to these schools.
Right.
What can be done about that?
Well, if you look at the statistics from the early 1980s to today, private college has increased 127% in terms of tuition and room and board since the early 1980s, which is huge. So first of all, what I've looked at is trying to change the way people graduate from high school. Look at alternative pathways to how you graduate. So in other words, if you're in high school in your junior and senior year, and if you want to go on to a trade, you could actually intern or do an apprenticeship. So you can go be hired to be, learn how to be a plumber, or to be an electrician, or to be a beautician, or to be a paralegal. And you could be interning, so you'll get high school credit for it. But also when you graduate from high school, you'll get the Regents diploma, but it will say emphasis in plumbing or emphasis in paralegal
It's
work.
a grade the out program. Didn't like shop used to be to a degree. A lot of people went into automotive when I was in high school. Went into automotive
And there's
shop.
still great programs like at Wilson Tech and BOCES and
Yeah.
things, so you could actually get licensing when you
So
leave.
it's along those lines. Then.
Yeah, exactly. So when you exit high school, you could be employed in a full-time position, hopefully working for the place you did your apprenticeship. And the employers is going to like it because if they take on the high school student, not only do they build up future people to take on their trade, but also they'll get a $1,500 tax credit for each person that they have. And then this student, when they exit high school, they could decide to go to college full-time, which is perfect, and they'll receive 15 credits from high school that will transfer into college credits, so they get college credit right away. But if they decide to go part-time, they can always work around the work schedule in a good field. So if they're an electrician, they'll work with the electrician during the day and decide to go to school at night, so it's a win-win situation.
The crossover period would be that you go from the high school to take some of these special courses and then go to college with these credits along with you.
Yes.
Is that right?
And then but you also have a job during the day. So as an electrician or a plumber or a paralegal, or if you want to work in a hair salon, so you'll have the training you need. So when you exit high school, you have a good paying job.
Sounds like a OJT. We need that.
Yeah, so it's actually something we've worked on. We've had press conference on it. I know my bill was held in the Education Committee a few weeks back, but we're going to press on it so it comes up again. The other thing we have to speak about is what can we do more because student loans are out of control.
Right.
We have different scholarships that we've implemented in New York State. One of them, we lose, some people from our state, the younger people, and they go other places, correct? So we want to make sure that students stay here after they graduate. And we have a STEM scholarship. So if you graduate in the top 10% of your high school class and decide to major in a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics area, we will pay for your college tuition if you go to a SUNY or CUNY school. The only thing is, once you exit, you have to stay in New York for 5 years, right? Because we want you to contribute back to the economy. That's one thing. So that's already in place.
So that keeps the money here too.
Keeps the money, keeps their minds here, and
Yeah.
adds back into the economy. The other piece of legislation that's already been implemented, the scholarship I just spoke about, but the other piece of legislation that I've introduced would create $1,000 a year scholarships as long as you graduate from the top 20% of your high school class and you decide to go to a community college. And also we petitioned the federal government to make sure that they give students the option to refinance their student loans, but not lose the benefits of getting the federal protection when they get federal loans from the federal government in terms of for college. So,
A lot to cover. You mentioned someplace in one of the papers I read from your website about gap elimination adjustment mandate. Is that for the Sagamore children? Is that for that specifically?
no, so with the gap, a few years back, when the economy began to downturn,
Budgetary
right.
constraint.
So in other words, a lot of the schools lost, especially the schools in high tax areas, which is most of Long Island, got funding cut to them.
Something else to ask you
correct?
about that. Yeah, go
and the
ahead.
gap elimination adjustment took away money from the schools. So over the past few years, we've tried to restore that money back to the school districts. Last year, we restored $400 million to it. This year, we restored another $400 million. So it's added money to the school districts that was taken away back from a few years ago. So they could replace staff and teachers that they cut, or replace academic programs that they had to cut, or replace extracurricular programs. So it's a funding that the school districts receive.
Let's talk a little bit about the taxes. The community is suffering from a lower tax base. The money available isn't there anymore. The taxes are down a little bit, I guess, from either from foreclosure rates, I don't know, but there's an awful lot less. And now, in some ways, we timed in with the red light cameras. We wonder about where that money's going to pay for what programs on the Suffolk County Legislature. But some of these families are not able to keep their kids here anymore. They're leaving the state. Some of the families are retiring and leaving the state also. There's a little bit of an exodus here in Long Island too. Are we experiencing that in Huntington?
Well, the numbers have maintained steady, but high taxes are something that all of Long Island or a place like Huntington has to be worried about. Now, back when the governor was first elected, one of the things that he earmarked was the tax cap, and it's a 2% tax on the levy of taxes, or it's the rate of the consumer price index. So what has happened is that has helped hold taxes for the municipalities, the towns, the school districts. Has lowered the tax burden over the past few years. The only problem is now what we need to do as a state government is lessen the amount of mandates that the school districts and the towns and the counties have to follow. Because tax relief is one good thing, but we just need to make sure it accompanied with mandate relief, which the state has never worked on the past few years. And this budget cycle
that was a problem years ago. State mandates were a problem a long time ago.
And they've never really gone away. And the governor created a commission to study the mandates. The recommendations came, but nothing was ever implemented. So we really have to go back to the drawing board to see how the state can get off the local municipalities' backs and let them choose how to spend their money more wisely.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Let's go to something else you've worked on, the donor program.
Yes.
Okay, tell me, that's apparently James Conti's?
Right. So James Conti was a two-time kidney recipient. This is actually very fitting because we're in the month of April, and April's actually Donor Awareness Month in the state. When we look at the number of registrants, people that are registered to donate their organs in New York State, New York ranks last, 50 out of 50 states. Once we add the territory of Puerto Rico, our federal, we actually rank 51 out of 51.
Oh, geez.
The national average is 44% of Americans are registered to donate their organs. In New York, we're about 25%. So we have thousands of people that die across New York State because they're waiting in line, for organ donation.
You keep hearing stories about that,
Yeah, and the one thing is just awareness of it. That we're so life is so complicated because people working two jobs. They don't even think about how easy it is to go on a website or look at the back of their license to do such a thing. And Assemblyman Conti did create the donor life registry. Everything
it doesn't seem like it's necessary that you have to sell that program.
Yeah, but I guess it's just people are our lives are very busy, and that somebody don't step back to just say maybe I should do this.
Right.
And I registered a few years back and everything because I remember Assemblyman Conti was very big on it, and that's how I got involved in it. And basically, it's just an awareness program. Now, we do have different pieces of legislation out there. One of the things is to allow 16 and 17-year-olds, they can register to donate with parental permission, and then at any time they can revoke or cancel that they want to donate. So that's a piece of legislation that we're working on right now. And the other thing that I'm trying to get passed is to allow, our high school students need to take health when they're in high school. And what we want to make sure is that part of the health curriculum includes organ donation awareness, just so they're aware that this is how you register, this is how it saves, one person could save 8 lives, and just to make them more aware of how to register, just to go about it.
That's a good idea.
So really, it's just more about education, people realizing that just take a few moments to register, and we'll start to climb off of that 50 out of 50 rank.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I hope so.
Yeah. So
that's a very long
New York's
number
a great place, but we don't want to rank dead last in that. So
that's for sure. Real quick, the hot number political things you're working on, because we only have about 2 minutes left. To what is it that you have done that you want to do? You want to talk about real quick on the bills that you have upcoming? Anything you're working on besides the donor program?
Right. So we spoke about the donor program, higher education,
Right.
and one of the things that you did bring up before was Sagamore Hill, which was very interesting because a few years back, the executive branch of the governor wanted to close Sagamore Hill in terms of inpatient services, but we realized how important Sagamore is.
That's a child development.
Exactly. It's over in Dix Hills, and many of the school districts, all the school districts affected. So anywhere from 7 to 17 could be placed there that need the help that they need. And then once they get the help that they need, they're released and go back with their families, and then they're assimilated back into their normal school districts. And while they're there, they get the treatment that they need, they get the education that they need, and it's a great program. So we want to make sure Sagamore Children's Center is not closed, and that's a yearly battle we're going to have just to make sure, because it's the only one on Long Island, state service like that. If not, the people out in Montauk and out east would have to go into, the city, to the Bronx or the Queens, in order to see their children or to have the children get the services that they need.
How many kids are in that school, and what's the capacity?
Well, right now it has 70 beds. It has capacity to have more depending on the funding levels. So it does, provide a very important service, and that's the Sagamore Children's Center over in Hicks Hills.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and effort, and good luck.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure.
You've been watching FIT TV, the program that brings you behind the scenes of our divorce culture at FIT. We know you cannot get this information on your own, so we'll bring it to your TV every single week. My name is Chris DiMaggio, and thank you for watching FIT, and we'll see you again next week.